Hello, you gorgeous, gorgeous creatures, human and otherwise. It's me, the bee, and yes, a brand new angle. Now you can see how much of a geek I am. Okay, so today I'm going to review one of my personal favourite books of all time, and that is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. The Bronte sisters, in general, have a very interesting story, and I'm quite sure if any of you who are particularly familiar with literature at the time of the Bronte sisters being alive, you will understand that the Bronte sisters were a very interesting bunch, them and their brother Branwell. But that's a completely different video, completely different topic, and you probably don't want to hear that in one single book review. So, Wuthering Heights was originally published in 1847 under Emily Bronte's pseudonym of Alice Bell, because back then, you know, women naturally could not be authors. It was completely inconceivable. So, unfortunately, some sacrifices had to be made in order for this story to circulate, but as time has gone on, naturally, her actual name has been re-established into the book, and now it is a classic. So, and for good reason. Wuthering Heights, to me, represents the idea of generational conflict, as well as the inability to reconcile love and hate in the human mind. Countless themes are smattered throughout this book, make no mistake. It's a very complex and very compelling read. You see, the events of Wuthering Heights take place over multi-generations. You see, it doesn't just contain itself to one particular epoch. And getting into the idea of generational conflict, it starts with this dynamic between one family, and it just continues on. It goes on in a cycle. But the main perpetrator of this conflict is the character of Heathcliff. Heathcliff is one of the most, if not the most notorious, characters in, romantic literature. I mean, granted, I have not read every single example of this, but Heathcliff himself is, for lack of a better term, he is a beast in man's clothing. You see, Heathcliff had very humble beginnings. You have this rather rich fellow, Mr. Earnshaw, who picks him off the street and brings him home to be raised. And, that's a very sort of, amiable gesture. But you see, Heathcliff is... At first, he is despised in the Earnshaw household, particularly by Earnshaw's two legitimate children, Catherine and Hindley. And, as time goes on, Catherine actually starts to become very fond of Heathcliff, and they generate a very raw and, deep and primal connection between each other. And it goes way beyond mere romance. These two become soulmates. This entire tale is about this, frustration these two people feel when they're unable to reconnect. And it's not a case of unrequited love, necessarily, but it is a story about love being constantly stymied, turn by turn, through, unfortunate circumstances. And most of these circumstances come from Heathcliff himself. Due to his horrible treatment by Earnshaw's other child, Hindley, he becomes bitter. He becomes hateful. And finally, he just has had enough of this treatment. After Mr. Earnshaw died, Hindley took control of the household, and he made Heathcliff the slave. He made him, cook. Not cook, but basically work the property. Okay, he was a servant. So Heathcliff peaced out, and he comes back about 10 or so years later, and he is glowing with green. The guy is so rich, and he has become a very, dark and handsome individual. But to him, money is not enough. Heathcliff wants more, and most importantly, he wants Cathy. But by this point, Cathy is married to another man named Edgar. And of course, Heathcliff finds this completely unacceptable. And therefore, he begins his most explosive and most destructive plan of revenge. And it is a revenge that just like spans over years and years. And just like I said, as the generations go by, this conflict just completely just reignites itself. It's unbelievable. So it's going back to my own personal experience with Wuthering Heights. Right here, you see this? This is basically an heirloom of sorts. My grandparents had this, or rather, yeah, they had this massive collection of classical literature, and my mum, she basically inherited it. Now, she had read a couple of them, but she had not read Wuthering Heights, and, you know, she passed it on to me. I mean, look at this. Look at that. Yes, that the spine's a little bit distressed by years of reading, but this book holds tremendous value to me. You know, not the least of which being it's a very impressive book, but it's about... Wuthering Heights is about legacy. And in the case of the themes of the story, it's about a dreadful legacy. It's like a curse that's being passed down from generation to generation just because one man could not let his hatred go. So frustrated and so driven he was by his raw and violent passions that he is completely unable to accept the hand that life has dealt him. He wants to remain in control. And another great aspect about Wuthering Heights is that it perfectly displays the hypocrisy of society at the time. And given Heathcliff started at the lowest rung of society and he worked his way up, and just his treatment and his behaviour, he basically, in a sense, becomes Hindley. He becomes his own worst enemy. And you sort of get the feeling that Heathcliff is aware of this, but once again, he just cannot let it go. And there's this really... one of my favourite quotes in the book comes from this. At one point, unfortunately, spoilers, Catherine dies giving birth to the other child of the man that she's with. And at one point, you know, Heathcliff just like fucking lets it all loose. And he says, and I quote, "Catherine Earnshaw, may you not rest as long as I am living. You said I killed you. Haunt me then. Be with me always. Take any form, drive me mad. Only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you." Such powerful, powerful words. And Emily Bronte, just like the rest of her sisters, she had her own issues. And but one thing she truly understood was the nature of the human soul. The nature of the human soul of the time of which she was writing this story. And she's just... she understands the concept of this. This story is also a fable of sorts. It shows you just how far can you go before you become consumed by your own unhappiness. And this Wuthering Heights, it is a parable. It is a parable as much as it is a story that is built on some sense of romance. It's a lesson. It teaches the reader that you will not always get what you want in life, and you can either accept it, move on, and make something of yourself, or you can hold on to that grudge. And for a while, it may feel good, especially when you have a particular sense of power. But as time goes on, that eats at you, and eventually it leaves you empty. So, that's what this book does to me. It makes me feel very introspective and emotional, but it has a mythical quality. And actually, in the narrative, there is the main narrator of the story, Nelly Dean. She worked as the maid for the families in this book, like Heathcliff's family and Catherine's family. So she has seen all these dynamics happen over, you know, X amount of years. And the way she tells this story to a fellow who's staying at the Wuthering Heights house, or rather, no, not Wuthering Heights, Thrushcross Grange. I'm sorry, I can't say that. And but the quality of which she tells the story, it takes place, you know, throughout the entire thing. Like, it's all about her recollections of these memories. And you know how it is, like, when you have, like, a narrator, a primary narrator, like, conveying to you the events of the story, you're not quite sure as to whether or not they are reliable or not. Recollections are based on memory. Memory is based on being subjective rather than objective. Objective is just the pure cold hard facts. Subjective is the emotional response and reaction to what's going on, and therefore processing it in your own way. And Nelly's narrative, again, it takes on a particularly mythical quality because this story just seems completely outlandish. But when you get down to the bare bones of it, it's this constant cycle of love and hate and love, just being an Ouroboros, like constantly eating its own tail. And you know, Dean's narration of it, it's almost like it's like a legendary story that's been passed on from generation to generation, and that's pretty much, again, what Wuthering Heights is all about. So, that being rambled, I would have to give Wuthering Heights a 5 out of 5, quite easily. And it's amazing how much this story has been able to endure. It doesn't have the most pleasant of you know, situations and like pleasant of themes, but that's what makes it so compelling. It's something we can all relate to. And sure, we may not, you know, necessarily have gone through the experiences of this family, and, you know, hopefully we never do, but just getting down to what is it like to be so consumed by our emotions, by our passions, and being so frustrated when they're not realized, and like observing how, you know, the world works and the society of which we function in. Wuthering Heights is a perfect means of displaying this. And I'm so glad that even, like, you know, more than 200 so years later, this is a story that resonates. It just continues to do so. It keeps on being republished, it keeps on being, you know, being taught in schools or universities or what have you, and people just keep on remembering it and passing it down and just expanding this book's reach more than maybe like Emily Bronte herself could have possibly imagined. So thank you. Thank you so much for watching this. And I do hope, to those of you out there who have not yet read this book, I sincerely hope you do so. If not to love it, then to take it in and just appreciate what this powerhouse of a story is all about. So thank you so much, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.